Hi everyone. Okay, this is a short video that's going to go over one of the things that's going to sort of lord over your entire writing career, and that is acceptance and rejection of your work. I mentioned this in passing in a couple of other lectures, but here's an important and hard to swallow sometimes truth of trying to be a writer is that you're going to hear the word no a lot. I don't know any writer contemporary who has never had their work rejected. One of the sort of most famous stories of a writer getting rejected is the story of J.K. Rowling, who is probably the richest writer in the world, whose books have sold more copies than anyone else's. But when she first proposed the Harry Potter series, 20 something, I've heard 22, 24, 26, no one's quite sure the number, but it was a lot of literary agents rejected her work. And it took a long time before she picked up, got herself an editor and a publisher. And so rejection is part of the game. So one of the things that any writer has to prepare themselves for is for them to get told no. But here's the thing that I want to help you with today is show you that not every no is created equally. So we're going to look a little bit at some, I'm going to show you some sample rejection letters of mine to try to give you some insights into what these things can mean. Before we get into the less pleasant stuff, let's start with something fun. So you might be wondering, well, what does an acceptance letter look like? So this here is an example. So when I submitted this story, Mourners, several years ago to a magazine, and several magazines, and I can't remember if it got rejected by a few places first. Odds are it did. But the response that you will get when you get something accepted is something like, "Thank you for sending us Mourners. We love it and would like to publish it in the fall issue of Syntax and Salt Stories. Our editorial staff will be in touch with suggestions or requests should we have them, and we look forward to working with you as we prepare the issue." So that's what an acceptance letter looks like. Thought I'd start with something nice. I also wanted to take a second to mention that when you do get your work accepted, some different magazines take different approaches to what they're going to ask you to do. Some of them will just publish your work as it's submitted. Some of them are going to have you go through some edits. One magazine, I worked with an editor and we went through 4 or 5 drafts. Other times they might just send you one set of suggestions and that's it. So it really depends on the magazine. Some of them are going to have you sign a contract. Some are not. And if you get a contributor copy or if you're getting paid, they'll just send you your money and that sort of thing. So that really kind of just depends on the magazine. You should always, when you get your work accepted, if you want to ask them what their procedure is, please feel free to do that because they should be willing to tell you exactly how things are going to go. That's not like it should feel like a secret. So I just wanted to share that to give us something uplifting about this video. So now let's move into a couple of, I'm going to show you 3 rejection letters because they're all kind of different. Because like I said, not all rejection is the same. So here's a fairly basic rejection letter. Dear Joe Bauman, thank you for submitting to Q. We appreciate the chance to read your work, but unfortunately your piece was not right for us. Thank you again for your interest in Q. Our next open submission period will begin October 15th, 2017. Regards, the editors, Q Literary Journal. So this is what I would call a form rejection letter. This is the most basic kind of rejection letter you're going to get. It's not particularly personalized. It doesn't explain why your work didn't get accepted. Don't really expect a lot of explanations of why work doesn't get accepted. And so what this would tell me as the writer is that what I can't even remember what story this was related to, probably didn't get past sort of an initial round of screening. You know, most of the time stories are going to go through a number of levels of vetting, so odds are this one simply didn't get past the initial round. Now, I've had people ask me, does that mean I should never send to that place again? The answer is no. You should always feel like you can send to a magazine as often as you want or as often as their guidelines allow. Just make sure you're not sending the same thing again unless they have invited you to do so. But this would tell me, you know, that this magazine, for this particular piece of writing, I didn't get very far in their screening process. But now let's compare that to another letter. I don't even remember what magazine this is from because they didn't put their name in it in there, but it would have been in the cover, in the subject line, of course. So, thank you for letting us see Snowbird. We very much enjoyed reading it. Despite its many fine qualities, in the end we felt that the piece was not right for fiction. Okay, so the magazine was Fiction Magazine. We hope this encourages you to keep writing and submitting. We'd like to see more of your work if you would like to submit again. Sincerely, the editors. Okay, so this is different, right? The tone is different. It's more inviting. It's probably still a kind of form letter. They probably didn't write this out specifically to me. Most magazines probably have multiple kinds of rejection letters that they will send. So this is what I would call a higher tier rejection letter. So it maybe got past that first round of screening, at least got talked about a little bit. And this is what's the important part, is this thing, that we'd like to see more of your work if you would like to submit again. I think they mean that. In my experience with these magazines that say this in their rejection letters, that's a good thing. Here's the thing. Most magazines are getting way more submissions than they can publish. So they don't really need to tell people to send them more work. So if they do that, that means they mean it. They like something about your work. They may not have ultimately accepted it, which obviously was the case here, but that doesn't mean that they wouldn't want to look at more of your work. And so that's a good sign. So that's why, if you remember in the video of my submission log, that's why I keep track of those good rejection letters, so I know journals that may want me to bring my work back to them. But I want to show you one more rejection letter. So this is from the Jabberwock review several years ago. So they said, "Dear Joe Bauman, thank you for sending us Pinwheel. Although it didn't quite work for us, I enjoyed it. Sort of like if Barth Lost in the Funhouse and Cheevers the Swimmer had a baby. Anyway, it came close, and another journal will almost certainly snatch it up. Meanwhile, appreciate having had the chance to consider it for publication, and hope you'll try us again in our spring reading period. Sincerely yours, Michael Cardos, editor, Jabberwock Review." So the first thing that I want to point out is this is from the editor-in-chief directly. So that means that this story certainly made it to that person's desk, because the odds are that unless a work is seriously being considered, it probably isn't going to be read by the lead editor. There's other readers that are going to read things before it gets that far. That's not universal, but that's most often the case. I'm the head editor of my magazine. I do read everything, but there are a lot of magazines where sort of initial screeners will make decisions without the editor-in-chief ever looking at things. But notice how specific this is. There's direct mention of a number of other writers, so clearly this was written personally for me. They said that it came close, and again, they said that they wanted me to submit more work. I'm not sure that I actually had submitted more work to them at the time. This was several years ago that this letter was written to me, but they certainly stayed on my radar. Now, one thing that I would do with these journals that send me this kind of rejection letter, so the Jabberwock Review, or if I submitted something again to Fiction Magazine, in my cover letter, I might indicate something like, "Although a previous submission was not ultimately accepted, I was strongly encouraged to submit again." And in the case of the Jabberwock Review, I might actually mention Michael Cardos by name. I might say, "Although a previous submission wasn't ultimately accepted, your editor-in-chief at the time, Michael Cardos, suggested I submit more work, or encouraged me to submit more work." Because, again, they mean it when they say it. Because magazines don't need to ask people to submit more work because they're getting plenty already. So you can always kind of interpret your rejection letters in these particular ways, because not all rejection letters are created equal. So I hope you find that helpful. And again, I really have to stress that you have to learn not to take rejection personally. It's going to happen, and it's going to happen a lot. I have gotten probably 1,100, 1,200 rejection letters in my life. For every acceptance letter I get, I probably get 10 or 15 rejection letters. It's just a part of trying to get your work published. And sometimes it is your work needs some tinkering, but sometimes it's just finding a place that's got the same kind of aesthetic sensibilities as you. And one way that you can make note of that is in what kind of rejection letter you get. When I got this impersonal rejection letter from this magazine, maybe I think about, what did I send them? Maybe if I've got this other story that's very much like the one they rejected and sent me a form of rejection, I don't send that one, because maybe that's not what they're looking for. And here's one other thing I want to mention, is there's not anything unprofessional or unkind that Q was doing. They weren't trying to send me a message. They weren't being rude. The reality is these journals are getting tons of submissions, and you just have to get your communication to them, to writers, from these magazines as quickly as possible. And so they have to use, oftentimes, these very form sorts of rejection letters. So when you start sending your work out, if you haven't already, don't take rejection personally, but read in between those lines, because sometimes you'll find that will tell you some things about where your writing is at. Okay, as always, if you have any questions, please post in the proper forum. Thanks, everybody.